On August 16th, Emil Pagurillo, the lead writer on Starfield, and Will Shen, the lead quest designer on Starfield, are going to be having a Q&A where they answer questions that are being submitted to the official Bethesda Game Studios Discord by all of you. How is it going, everybody? My name is DeMarco, and I'm so glad that Bethesda is taking the time to do this. This was an idea that I initially had brought up during my ups and downs, the highs and the lows of Starfield video that I made very recently. There weren't really any follow-up interviews, there weren't really the AMAs, there weren't blog posts on their own website to clarify a lot of the simple questions that I think fans were having about the game. Even with 40 minutes, it's impossible to get out all the details that we'd probably want to know about the game before we go ahead and play it. There were a lot of amazing questions that were asked in the Discord. Among them, things I'm curious about myself, such as how does travel between planets in the same system work? Can you fly just in a straight line and eventually get there, or do you need to fast travel between them the same way that you would grav jump between systems, for example? But among them are also some questions we either already know the answer to, or we can make some pretty good guesses about that hopefully I can address for all of you today, but we're making our best guess based on either past Bethesda games or what has been said, even if not directly confirmed. I have 10 questions to get through today, so let's get started. Question number 1 is from Carpo. Is there a limit on outpost size, and can we freely build custom structures for the outposts, or are they all pre-made? The first part of the question, we absolutely know there is a build limit, unfortunately. We don't know how much that build limit, how big that is. It must be expanded from the likes of Fallout 4. If it's not, that'd be pretty disappointing. And even if it is fairly restricted, then of course some of the first mods I remember coming out for Fallout were ones that remove the build limit entirely. Of course, the reason why it's there is to preserve stability of the game. Now, the other part of that, whether or not the structures are going to be pre-made, probably, but that doesn't mean you can't customize the interiors. This is speculation. However, with the starships, whenever you select a certain module, those come with pre-built interiors. Within your outposts, you'll probably be able to lay out each individual component inside the buildings as you wish, but you will still have things like the habitation module and the side rooms and the hallway rooms, and you connect those however you want to build your outpost. I'll also say it makes a lot more sense for it to be done that way in the context of Starfield, where you'd be working with some kind of futuristic tech to manufacture these buildings and these modules, versus Fallout, where you're putting up every wall as scrap, one piece at a time. It's much more appropriate here to be done that way. Upbeat asks, where should we go first? Anywhere your heart desires. Todd Howard explicitly mentioned 2 step-out moments as you're playing Starfield, and one of them always in a Bethesda game is when you get to this point, you've left whatever the tutorial-ish area of the game is, and then it tells you, you're right, you're free to go wherever you want to go. Here's the main quest. Do it, don't do it, we don't care. The journey's now in your hands. Simon asks, will there be epic sprawling space battles like the ones we see in Star Wars? Something tells me that in your mind you're probably picturing episode 3, because that was one of the best moments that I remember in Star Wars seeing as far as a space battle goes. Somewhat. There's one clip in particular during the Starfield Direct that really impressed me with the amount of lasers that were just being fired off in every which direction. It was absolutely awesome, and I love to see that, because I admittedly for a long time thought the space combat would be kind of underwhelming. You against 2-3 ships. Even the first gameplay that they showed off was just you versus 3 ships in barren, empty space. While I don't think you're going to be taking down capital ships like you can in the original Star Wars Battlefront games, if that's what you're hoping for, although there is this one shot where you have this much larger ship that is firing towards us seemingly. So never say never. Things like being able to disable and board ships. If your ship is really close to blowing up, you disable someone else's, you board that one in the middle of combat, you start flying that around to take out the rest of the enemies. Honestly, the possibilities are all there, it's just whether or not we can actually do them in the game. Tali85 asks, how will player death be handled in Starfield? We have zero reason to believe that death will be handled in any other way than it has been in past Bethesda Game Studios games. That's just the nature of it. You die, load your last save, and you get right back into the action wherever that might be. Plain and simple. Air Raid says the ESRB rating page mentions the game has in-game purchases. Can you expand on whether this means any microtransactions or if this just refers to paid DLC packs? Now, as they say, when the ESRB says in-game purchases, it can refer to DLC, microtransactions. The Creation Club would technically qualify as in-game purchases. They're all just lumped under that one term. We don't know exactly what it might be. In the case of Starfield, I will say I am 99% confident it's not referring to microtransactions for Starfield. It's probably referring to DLC, which is already confirmed with the Shattered Skies expansion pack, and it could also very well be referring to incoming Creation Club content, assuming the Creation Club plans to make a return, which I do think it will. One of my favorite questions being asked by yous. They say, in most of the scenes in the Direct, you couldn't loot armor off bodies, but in a few select ones, you actually could. Will we be able to loot armor from NPCs in the base game? If so, will it be conditional? Many of you will know that in past Bethesda games, if you saw a cool piece of gear on an enemy, you can shoot them or slash them with a sword and take it. It's yours to have for slaying them. Whatever the morality cost might be there, it's your gear now. In Starfield, it was interesting when only specific parts of the gear might just be a helmet or a pack or the suit itself, but it was never all of the pieces that they were individually wearing that you could take, raising this question. And I'm inclined to believe that what we saw in the Direct is the actual way that it will play out when we get Starfield. The only reason I could really think as to why they would hide certain pieces of gear during the Direct would be if the names of them had spoilers, but when the pieces we have seen during the gameplay are things such as Deep Explorer spacesuit and stuff along those lines, or Deep Recon, I have a hard time believing that the name of suits would be so spoilery they had to be removed from the gameplay. A possible development reason this might be the case, there may be less armors in the game overall, and they didn't want you looting the same types of armor over and over and over again. However, ideally, this means there's a lot more depth, so much more customization that each suit can have to make them feel unique. I would be okay with that. A headcanon reason, if you're shooting a spacesuit on an individual and it's now riddled full of bullet holes, it's not really going to do a good job protecting you. F says 226 asks, is there a point where we need to choose between one of the three main factions? Presumably referring to the Crimson Fleet, the Freestar Collective, and the United Colonies. Will Shen, during his developer Q&A video, actually already seemingly touched on this. Have a listen for yourself.
We decided, we really want to make sure that you can play through all the faction lines independently of each other.
More like Skyrim, it sounds to me, where you can play each of the three faction quest lines independently being the operative word out of what he said there, so feel free to join any and all of them. And of course, they did mention in the past how you could double cross and be a double agent, so that might play into it a little bit. Curious how that will have an effect on the overall game. Starfield Countdown asks, can we purchase player homes in all four main cities? New Atlantis, Neon, and Aquila, I'm putting my bet down on yes. As for Sidonia, that's the one that raises a bit of a question mark for me. It's the first human settlement, as Will Shen explained, but since then, seems like we've moved on to greener pastures, so to speak, and now it looks like more of a mining facility more than anything else. Will Shen does refer to Sidonia as a city directly.
One of the early settlements that humanity created after they left Earth. It's called Sidonia, and that's a whole city with its own problems and people to meet.
But as far as a home there, again, that one, big question mark. At the very least, we know that you can land anywhere on the planet, so I'd be surprised if you can't live as a frontiersman of sorts nearby where the cities are, even if you can't buy a home directly in them. Well, that would be a bit disappointing. Maybe rewarding for some, but disappointing, I'm sure, for others. Freeman asks, how varied are the planets that aren't handcrafted? It's important to note that none of the planets are fully handcrafted. That would be impossible for Bethesda to do. So one of two things, either you are referring to the locations, assuming that the locations aren't handcrafted, or you're just talking about how interesting and how many variations of the different biomes might we find. As far as the locations go, what you can actually get a pretty good look at this during the initial Starfield gameplay reveal, where they're approaching that base on the moon of Crete. You see the player character find some interesting wildlife, the terrain is varied, they go through a little cave, it seems cool, and then of course you get to the location itself, which is handcrafted being the base. And you'll notice everything off in the distance is really just open plains and fields and some mountainous things, but there's not much there. That really seems intentional in a way, because that is the procedural generated part of the planet. We also do know that multiple biomes can be stitched together. They work in these kind of giant plates that then stitch themselves to make the entirety of the planet. So if you mean variation in that sense, there will be that. We just don't know the extent of how often we'll see 2 biomes per planet. Presumably it will depend on the composition of the planet's atmosphere and stuff of that nature. My best guess, and I still stand by this, is when you do land on a planet, yes, you can land anywhere, but the location itself that you land at won't be all that interesting, versus if you go to a specific landing point near a point of interest, that will have a lot more to do. The terrain will be a little bit more varied. You'll see cooler sites. You'll have the location itself. So I hope that answers your question to some extent, but a lot of this is speculation. Dark Lord Waffles asks, my question as a mod creator is unsurprisingly about mod support on PC. Will Starfield allow third-party mods, Nexus, Steam Workshop, or will it be locked to Creation Club only? Bethesda understands the value of mods to their game. They are not going to explicitly lock off every single mod to the Creation Club entirely, and I could tell you the actual reason why. Creation Club content is officially supported by Bethesda.
These outside creators work hand in hand with Bethesda Game Studios, which means all content will be fully compatible with your save games, achievements, and official add-ons.
There's no possible way that Bethesda can do that for every single mod that people want to submit. It's just impossible. If they did, it would noticeably kill their modding scene, and I will say Bethesda, again, understands the importance of these mods, and they're going to allow for these third-party resources to upload them. That also allows for things like commercial content, so you can have Star Wars appear in Starfield because it's a third-party thing, and if it were put on the Creation Club, stuff like that wouldn't exist. And I think Bethesda wouldn't want to hamper that by saying, no, only Creation Club. So there you go, about 10 questions in roughly 10 minutes. If you enjoyed or disagree with anything that I said here, let me know why down in the comment section below. And if you want to see part 2 to this, I already have some pretty good questions sourced out if you wanted another one. So let me know, and as always, I hope to see you all next time. So long, everybody.